Very pleasant good afternoon to all of our friends, those who are joining us via Second Advent Radio. We welcome you, whether you are listening at 101.5 FM or you're listening via one of the streaming services. Always a pleasure to have you. And those of you who are on Facebook, on YouTube at SLC Adventist or on YouTube at SLC Church Channel, we welcome you and pray that you will truly be blessed by this afternoon's session. Let's Talk, of course, is a program that discusses issues. We are not afraid here to deal with the issues. Our aim is to provide meaningful answers and to give you, of course, the perspective of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. This afternoon, we are going to be discussing a very important subject. We're talking about the legitimacy of the tithe, and we have two special guests with us this afternoon. Before we introduce our guests on this important subject of tithing, we want to invite you to bow your heads with us as we have a word of prayer. Eternal Father and our God, we pray that you will be with us as we share with our friends in Radio Lands and those who are listening via the World Wide Web. We pray that you will be with our guests and grant that as we discuss this very important subject, that we will be able to provide clarity and understanding in Jesus' name. Amen. My friends, this afternoon we have two guests with us. I want to first introduce to you a young man, emphasizing young, young man. He is I didn't mean to make you laugh.
Thank you.
But Pastor Bertie Henry believes that sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing are the same thing. Guyanese by birth, alumnus of Caribbean Union College, CUC, with a Bachelor of Business Administration, and Andrews University with a Masters of Business Administration. God's call took him through several organizations, serving at Davis Memorial Hospital as the CEO, at CUC, now USC, as the business manager, East Caribbean Conference as treasurer, and for the past 11 years, he has served as treasurer of the Caribbean Union Conference. He also currently serves as an associate pastor of the Maraval Seventh Adventist Church in Trinidad. And as of January 2018, he was ordained as to the gospel ministry. He has been a Seventh Adventist for more than 4 decades and finds joy and fulfillment serving his community through his religion. He is a personal friend of mine. I am delighted to welcome Pastor Bertie Henry, the treasurer of the Caribbean Union, to Let's Talk. Good afternoon, Pastor, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Go right ahead.
I am delighted to be here this afternoon. It's a joy and a privilege, I should say. I just wanted to tell you that, you know, many of these programs have really grown me, developed, and been adding to my spiritual growth. But I want to say and give a shout out to Sister Deborah Hughes and Sister Denise Thompson and Brother Eustace France, who inspired me. They really inspired me in the last 2 weeks. And weren't it for COVID, I'm sure we would have been meeting. But if I meet them, I hope it's not COVID environment, because I would breach the protocol. I just appreciate them. They're my newfound friend now. So when I get to your territory, if I can see them, that's great, man.
Most definitely. That would be a pleasure for us to arrange a formal introduction.
Yes.
Oh yeah, certainly. And you did well, Pastor Henry. You remembered their names. That's impressive. You know,
they inspired me. They inspired me.
Yeah. You know, I've had so many remarks about that particular program. You know, those individuals, they They all once were members of the church, left the church, but returned. And just hearing their stories, there's so much that we can take away from, those experiences. So much we have to learn as a church so that we do not repeat the same mistakes. But we're grateful that they did return and that they're faithful in their service to God at this time. Well, our second guest for this afternoon, also Trinidadian. Well, I said also, that means Pastor Henry.
The second half you give me.
All right. Well, that might be something in the making. This afternoon, we have with us the treasurer for the South Caribbean Conference. Dr. Yvette Peters has been the treasurer of the South Caribbean Conference from August 2019 to present. She is responsible for directing and managing the business and financial affairs of the conference. Prior to holding this portfolio, Dr. Peters worked for over 25 years in the telecommunications, environmental protection, and financial industries as a senior executive. She's a certified accountant, holds a master's degree in business, focusing marketing, and a doctorate in business, specializing in leadership and finance. She's married to Pastor Emmanuel Peters, a friend of mine, and has 3 adult children. Her family is precious and dear to her. Dr. Peters enjoys studying God's word and praying. Her other areas of interest include, but not limited to, interior decorating, reading, and meeting people. I believe you would need to meet my wife one of these days with the interior decorating aspect of it. But we are delighted to have you. Delighted to have you on Let's Talk this afternoon. Welcome, Dr. Peters.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I look forward to this experience. In fact, I think I tried to get on an hour before the time. That's to tell you how excited I am about coming onto this program.
Well, we're happy that you're here. And we are discussing a very important subject this afternoon, one that is significant in many ways. The Seventh-day Adventist Church, as God's remnant church, from time to time finds that there are individuals who come up with various challenges. Over the years, there have been pockets of people here and there who question the matter of tithing. So the question of tithing has surfaced. And, recently someone sent me a video of a former pastor, a former Seventh Adventist pastor, who was promulgating the idea that tithing is not biblical the way we explain it as a church. We want to look at the question of tithing this afternoon. Some are confused with respect to what exactly should they tithe. Is it really legitimate for us to return tithe and offering? And if it is, do I return tithe on things like Social Security, pension contributions, retirement income? If I sell my house, should I return tithe? Others claim that tithing was never intended to be applied to the church. So today and next week, I'm saying up front that we're going to have 2 sessions here. Today and next week, we will focus on this important question. And as I indicated, our 2 guests will guide us in our deliberations. So I want to again welcome all 2 of you and thank you for joining. Let's begin right away by asking, focusing on this whole matter. We're talking about tithing, but what exactly is the tithe? In very simple terms, how do we explain what the tithe is? Somebody may be listening who is not familiar with the concept, the term tithing. So how do we explain what the tithe is? Now we have 2 of you, so I'm going to call one of you. So Pastor Henry,
yes,
take
sir.
a shot at that.
Well, it's simply recognition of the sovereignty of God. It's 1/10 of your increase, 1/10 of the blessings of God you return to Him. In the most simplistic form, 1/10 of whatever God blesses you with, it is labeled as the tithe, recognizing God as the source of your blessing.
Very well, thank you. So in very simple terms, we're talking about 1/10. So when we talk about tithing, we're talking about returning a portion of our income to God. And you're saying, Elder Henry, that this is about 1/10. Now, it is interesting that you use a percentage, 1/10. So my question, and maybe Dr. Peters, you can respond to this. The idea of a percentage seems to suggest some degree of equity. Why do you suppose that God asked that we use a percentage rather than a fixed amount? We're talking about returning a portion to God, but he didn't say return $10 or $5 or $500. He gave a percentage, 10%, 1/10. Why a percentage? And what does this say about the matter of God being a God of equity in terms of not putting one person above the other?
Thank you for the question. And you are correct. Using a percentage really suggests equity, and it helps in that respect. When we are looking at measures where figures and money and so on are concerned, the best method to use is one of a percentage, because a percentage is relative. $10 is $10, but if I tell you 50% of 20 is $10, then you understand it a lot better depending on where you are or what you are looking at. And if we take a salesman, I'm using the salesman for example, or saleswoman. If you're negotiating with an individual like that, and you tell him, okay, I'll give you $10 for your as additional income or income on not each sale or on your sale, he finds $10 sounds almost like nothing. But if I tell him I will give him 50%, 20%, 10%, 30%, he then puts it in a different context altogether, because he's not relating the $10 to $1,000. He's relating the percentage to the $1,000 that he will receive. And God knows, and God is interested in each of us, and he knows each of us will have different capacity, financial capacity as well, economic capacity, wealth on a whole. So he said, look, you may have one sheep, I may have one goat, and they are all of different value. You may be working for $5, I may be working for 20. But if he asks me to give 10 and I'm working for $10, it means I have nothing remaining with which to support myself or my family. But if he asks me for 10%, I have another 9% by which I can, maintain my family, and it seems to be fair in that respect.
Very profound, Dr. Peters. Thank you so much for that response. Now, let me just go on from here. I did mention earlier that some persons are challenging the legitimacy of tithing. It is surprising to me that some give this challenge, the concept of tithing, the act of persons returning to God 10% of their earnings. I read in Leviticus chapter 27 and verse 30 that the tithe is holy to the Lord. And this, I believe, is an important consideration if we are going to be discussing this matter of tithing. We said it's 10%. Now Leviticus 27 and verse 30 says it is holy to the Lord. What is the implication of this in relation to how we should relate to tithing? When we talk about it being holy, what do we really mean by it is holy, and what's the implication? Now, who wants to take first about this?
Well, let me say that it being holy, holiness is an attribute of God.
God.
And I guess also that is why God was so specific And as Dr. Peters pointed out, the percentage seems to bring about this equity in his requirement. But the holiness of the tithe means that it was set aside for a specific purpose. It cannot be mixed with anything, or you cannot use it for anything. But whatever is holy, you know, God always has always been able to identify, and he has been able himself says what holy things were to be used for back in the Old Testament times, because they're holy unto him means that they were set aside for a specific purpose. God, it is associated with God. And that is why, you know, sometimes it's so, well, not confusing, but it is baffling sometimes that individuals could choose to tamper with something like the tithe, which God said is holy. But the holiness has to do with the use of it as indicated by God. And to this day, the church still continues to regard the tithe and treat it as a holy, something holy belonging to God.
Now, my understanding of the utterances of God is that they ought to be taken seriously. And if God says that the tithe is holy, then I don't have the right as a human being to question the fact that it is holy. I want, however, to focus on this concept of holiness a little bit more. And,
Okay.
and Elder Bertie, you indicated quite rightly that, you know, something that is holy is devoted, is set aside, is set apart for use by God. And you use that term there. I want to go back to it. You use that term, it is holy unto the Lord. Now, as a student of theology, I do understand that holiness is an attribute of God. When we say that God is holy, we mean that he's different from the ordinary. The whole etymology of the Hebrew word is to cut off or to mark off. So and the fact that it is God who is holy, he is the one who is designating this. The tithe, therefore, was to be used to denote something spiritual. When we say something is holy, that term is used to make reference to something that is separated from the regular everyday use, something that is put aside for sacred service. In the Old Testament, holiness is primarily associated with God himself, and only secondarily, and by God's instruction, may I add, with objects and places. In other words, God is the one who is the ultimate authority in determining what is holy. Something is not holy of and in itself, but only by designation of God. So the tithe, as being holy, is holy by God's designation. I think immediately of this story of Uzzah and the ark, when he put forth his hand to touch the ark.
That's right.
My question is, considering that the tithe is holy, is it not dangerous? Is it not dangerous to interfere with it, or for that matter, with holy things in general?
I think, okay, go ahead.
Yeah. I think if we as human beings, I should say, should just stop a moment and think. Now, especially if, I don't know if any of you have been to a Catholic church, but if you enter the Catholic church, there's solemnity. Right? You don't see people just rushing in there. You go in this very sacred way. And I should say, even in our church, we regard the church, the building that we sit in, as sacred. So there are some things you will not say in the church. Even though it's not wrong, but you would not say it in the church. There are some things you would not do in the church, even though it's not wrong, you would not do it in the church. Because the church of itself, we consider that area to be sanctified. And the tithe, God himself has said, it is holy. He has attributed holiness to it, as you said, Pastor Greene. And if he has attributed that degree of holiness to it, or that title to it, I can't understand. I don't think we as human beings have the authority to then move it as we want, because it is set aside, it is separated, and it's not only sanctified, it is separated and devoted. Because he said, bring all the tithes into my storehouse, that there may be. So it is set aside for something. It is not set aside just because he wants to set aside something. He wants us to put it there. He has made it clear to us, it is holy. And therefore, to just touch it or interfere with it, I have had people who come in, especially during COVID, when we were not opening the offices every day. And I remember one day a lady came and she said, I don't care what you're doing today, but take this money from my hand. It is a temptation to me. If I keep it, things are so tough with me. I will touch it, and I don't want to touch it because this is God's holy tithe. And that's the kind of fear, I don't want to say fear, but that's the pattern of thought we should have towards God's tithe and its holiness.
Thank you so
I want
much,
to jump in there,
Dr.
Pastor Dr. Greene, because sometimes man violating or going beyond or just treating it anyhow speaks to maybe the lack of knowledge of who God is, and also speaks to or testifies to the graciousness of God. God is great. God is just gracious unto us. But like Dr. Peters mentioned just now, I have come across several individuals who really have embraced the concept of holiness in their dealings with the tithe. And they have indicated how much they respect that, they respect what God has required, and the way they treat it, you can see it. And they have a good relationship going with God.
Most definitely. So again, the concept of holiness, something being holy, that which is holy is devoted to God, and we do not have the liberty to use it as we please. Dr. Peters used the example of the church, the church building. There are some things we do not do in the church building because, as we say, it is the house of God. And so we treat it with a degree of respect. We should likewise understand that when something is sacred, it is outside of our realm to determine what happens to it. There is a question that somebody is asking regarding the use of the tithe. We're going to get to that in a while, but before we get to the use of the tithe, because we're establishing foundation, and we did say that we're going to be here next week likewise, so we want to build on this. But let's look at some history. Leonard Hadley, when I was in CUC, he was a professor in the business department. I did a course called, what's the name of that course now? Finances of the SDA Church. He wrote a book called Polity and Finances of the SDA Church. And he suggests that tithing was introduced by Abraham in terms of the first reference to tithing occurring with an incident with Abraham giving tithe to Melchizedek. So it was introduced by Abraham, honored by Jacob, established by Moses, affirmed by the prophets, and confirmed by Christ. I suppose, given that, and you may want to comment on this, either of you, the Seventh Adventist Church has tithing as one of the fundamental pillars, this concept of, in a larger concept of stewardship. But when we look at the biblical history, the development of the tithe, we are not just doing something. Elder Bertie, you are the treasurer. of the union. So let me ask you, are we just asking members to tithe because we want money to finance the work of the church, or is this to be seen as a divine mandate?
Purely a divine mandate. And because a divine mandate is, of course, only God could declare something holy because he is holy. And it's a divine mandate. And we have seen in the Bible where Abraham and Jacob, as you mentioned just now, and there's evidence, Leviticus, from Genesis chapter 4, as early as that in the Bible, with Abraham and Melchizedek, and right through, and coming to the New Testament, this was still something that is very prevalent and was being observed. And Christ, on more than one occasion, happened to refer to it because it was something basic and understood. And so it is something, a divine mandate, and that is why the church, who seeks to do whatever God says, has been able to uphold this principle, this mandate by God. We see it as a mandate by God.
Okay.
And of course, the church was very careful too, as to be prayerfully asking God, okay, what can this be used for? We trace what has been used for in the Old Testament. And so the church now has been constantly praying about this and given inspiration, given direction by God, they've been able to mandate, okay, these are the only things can be used for.
Dr. Peters, do you have anything to add to that before we?
Yeah, I just want to add that if we can just look at the tithe as something that God, he doesn't have to take it from us. He didn't have to mandate it. It is really for us. And if we could look at it in the context of a relationship with God, whereby we are given an opportunity, or he provides us with an opportunity to be part of the great mission of saving souls. Giving that tithe, returning that tithe to do what God wants to be done with it for his work is about us. It is not, it's about us recognizing our relationship, being part of that relationship with him. Because the cattle on 1,000 hill belongs to him. Right? He doesn't have to have it.
That is true. I'm glad you made that point, that God is not in need of our finances. I mean, he owns it already. But don't we see tithing as a sort of test of faithfulness? Because I was talking to somebody the other day, and I shared with them that God is not like the government. The government taxes workers. When we work, we return, in Antigua, we return what we call statutory deductions, or monies are taken out of our monies. The Social Security in places where there is income tax. We don't have direct income tax here in Antigua, but we do have contributions to Social Security, contributions to what we call medical benefits. Some people may call it NIS. And we do have something called an education levy. The government deducts these. Every company, every organization has to deduct this from your salary before you get paid. So the government in that sense doesn't trust us. They take it out. They don't give us an access to return to them. But God gives us, and he says, return to me. So I see it in that sense as a sort of a test of faithfulness. It's his, but we are returning it. We have an opportunity to prove our faithfulness to him.
Yes. But, significant, as you mentioned just now, is not the need, but it's God's mandate. That's very, very important. Because even in Abraham's experience, Melchizedek didn't need that.
Nope.
Yeah, and let's look at that a minute in Genesis 14. You made reference to that a little earlier, Pastor Henry. Abraham returning tithe to Melchizedek. This is the first time we see this word tithe in the Bible. In Genesis 14, the context is invading kings had taken Lot, Abraham's nephew, as a prisoner of war. Of course, they had raided the surrounding towns and had taken Lot, Abraham's nephew, as a prisoner of war. Abraham, on the other hand, as he heard about this, that his nephew was captured, he went on a mission of rescue. He met with success. He was met with success, defeated the invading kings, freed his nephew, and recovered all the goods. Upon return, he met Melchizedek, priest of the Most High God. It is important for us to note how the Bible describes Melchizedek. It is the first reference we have to him in the scriptures. It simply says he was king of Salem and priest of the Most High God. So he was a priest, he was a godly man. And then the Bible tells us that Abraham gave him a tenth, a tithe of all that he had. Let's look at this a little bit to see what principles of tithing we can glean from this encounter. This man of God, Abraham, coming from rescuing his son Lot, defeating the kings who had taken Lot and the other person's hostage, so to speak. And he meets the priest and is given the priest a tenth of all he has. What principles can we learn from that?
You know, one commentator suggested that, well, in his research, that the king of Sodom also met Abraham.
Okay.
But Abraham didn't give him anything. He gave the priest, Melchizedek, the priest. And that is very significant because Abraham was not just giving anybody. He gave the priest, who happens to be king of Salem also, Melchizedek. And that is very significant as we studied, and God gave more clear instructions to the nations as to what the tithe was to be used for. And we see this as being, and that's the thing about it also. It really has been consistent in the handling of the tithe by the nation, by the early nations, right through. That God has given his instruction and it's well understood. And even in their understanding of it, God went ahead when he appointed the Levitical priesthood, the tribe of Levi as the priesthood, and not to assign them land, not to give them so many things because they were to live off of that. That is significant. God took it that the nations understood what was his mandate, and the Levitical priesthood was able to live off of that. That is significant because they ministered in the temple, day in, day out. That is important.
Very well. Dr. Peters, you want to add or?
Yeah, another point that I want to just focus on a little is the fact that, well, nothing is mentioned that Abraham was prompted to give this offering, to give the tithe. He gave a tenth of all. He gave tithe on all. He didn't give it on some. He gave it on all. And many times I like to think about tithing as systematically and willingly returning a tenth of one's income, one's increase to the Lord, and acknowledging that everything we own or we receive belongs to him. Abraham, he fought, but I don't know how much hard work he did to get all the spoil that he got. But he gave a tenth, and I think he did it willingly to the priest.
One final point on that, Dr. Greene. Abraham recognized it as God's hand.
Yep.
God who delivered these kings, because of several kings that came together. And Abraham and his men went out there and defeated them. And Abraham recognized that this was an act of God. It was God who delivered them in his hand.
You know, it's interesting how we are gleaning so much from this passage. Pastor Henry mentioned the fact that it wasn't just the king that Abraham was returning tithes to. There were other kings around, but he didn't give the tithes to the king, but he gave the tithe to the priest. And Dr. Peters mentioned the fact that Abraham was not asked to do this. He did it as not out of compulsion, so to speak, but with a willing heart. And if we take that principle, that recognizing who God is and coupling what Elder Henry just said there, acknowledging his faithfulness to us, then when we put that together, we should experience a sense of joy in being able to give back to God, because we really cannot measure what God has done for us in dollars and cents.
So true.
We have some very interesting questions coming up here from our viewers and listeners. But before I get to that, we want to consider briefly Malachi chapter 3. We hardly discuss tithing without going to Malachi chapter 3. And so before we answer the questions that our listeners are asking, and I looked at one of the questions and realized that we're going to make reference to Malachi 3 anyway. So Malachi 3 implies that to withhold a tithe is to rob God. What do you make of this? And what is the implication for us today? It says, will a man rob God? Bring you all the tithe into the storehouse. God asks, when the question was asked, will a man rob God? And the response was, wherein have we robbed thee? God's response was in tithes and offerings. So the idea of us robbing God when we withhold from him, I like to think that robbing is different from stealing. And robbing is a strong word. Now a person comes to steal, this is my designation, all right? This is not a dictionary definition. This is my definition. But when a person comes to steal, they do so when nobody is around, So the expectation there is that they would take your things in secret. They don't mean to harm you. They just mean to get what you have. And so either you are sleeping or you're not there, you left home to go to work, they break into your house, etc. But when a man robs you, so when a man meets you, barefaced, we like to say in Antigua, people are around, but he pulls a gun and he says, give me what you have. So he is confrontational. He tells you, give it to me. Now God says we rob him when we fail to return tithes and offering. A person goes to church every Sabbath in the presence of God and holds on to what God says is mine. God says that's robbery. Maybe you want to expand on that. What are the implications? Dr. Peters, you're smiling, so go ahead.
Yes, because I am just visualizing. You're sitting in church and you're listening to a sermon, and the sermon talks about stealing, but not with respect to offering. And you are there condemning whoever will commit this act. And there you are, who, if you weren't returning your tithes as well, committing the same act or even worse. And it's interesting that you have two different, you don't see stealing and robbing as synonyms. They are two different things altogether. And I don't know if this will be as forceful as what you are thinking, but I have a friend. One day I was talking to her about somebody who stole something, and she said, Yvette, that person didn't steal, that is a thief, and not THIEF, just a thief. And she felt so strongly about the act. But if we can just, for God to call us a robber, that is, for me, it's such an insult from a a God who cares and loves, merciful, gracious. And if you stand or if you sit, or whatever position you take, and think that you have, you literally probably put your hand against God, because the robber will do those things, put their hand a couple, try to gag you and all these, so that you wouldn't make an alarm, you wouldn't say anything, so that they can get away with what they have taken from you. But sometimes we do it over and over, and God does not embarrass us. He's still there, merciful unto us. But the same text said, imply that if we don't, if we rob him, there are consequences with the robbing. If we bring all that we have, we return the tithes, he will give us more, cup full, running over, that we cannot even carry. We will not even be able probably to sustain it at that length of time, or over a period of time.
Elder Henry.
I want to make 2 quick points on that. 2 quick points. One is I concur with you on the whole understanding of robbing. Yes, somebody who really takes it. But going forward on that, it also implies that tithe belongs to God, because you can only rob somebody of something that they own.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So God owns that 1/10. And so when we withhold it, we are robbing him of it. He's given a mandate. This 1/10 belongs to me. And you have a relationship with me, you understand, that belongs to me. And once you withhold that, then you're robbing. And this tithe, that's why we come back to the same point we made early on, that tithe is about the individual and God, not the church, about the individual and God. So you're robbing God. But as I peruse this text, not now, but so many times, I say, but because God is so gracious, he has promised us blessings when we fulfill that requirement. And I'm wondering now that there's another robbery going on. We're robbing ourselves of the blessings of God.
Mm-hmm.
Very good point. Very good point indeed. If we don't return, if we are not obedient to God in returning the tithes and offering, we are really putting ourselves in a disadvantageous position, because we are now losing his blessings. So double robbery.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, we do have some questions from our viewers, and we want to take time to entertain 1 or 2 of them now. The first question I see here is, who determines how the tithe is used after it is collected by the church? Now, of course, next week we're going to go into the use of the tithe, but so the question is not how is it used, but who determines how it is used. Elder Bertie, you're the treasurer of the union. When it comes to tithe policies, I expect you to have answers to these things. So who determines?
Well, I'm happy to say that this is something that is a very prayerful matter, and the church makes decisions, and it examines those decisions prayerfully. And we believe that the church has been inspired by God in those decision making. God also is the one who even set up the process, the structure in which we arrive at some decision. That's why this church, no one individual can get up and say, oh, I think we should do this or do that. Has to go through a whole process. And I've seen it right through the line where decisions are contemplated, and the level of prayer that is involved in that. If you maybe just permit me to expand on that a little, this prayerful approach, even for meetings that, of course, the policy decisions are made at the GC session time, where the world church is represented. We have this collective body meeting and being inspired. In between that, we have the executive committee of the GC. And I'm telling you that having given the privilege of attending some of these meetings, long before, if GC meetings start at 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock, we have individuals right in the room praying, a prayer session going on, that God would really inspire and guide and give wisdom. And after you do that kind of prayer and you engage in that exercise, one has to believe, and we see the wisdom on what comes out at the other end of the discussion and the decision being made. We just have to acknowledge this is God's doing. And so for the tithing policies, the scholars, the individuals who have been prayerfully sit down, give study to it, give study to what God has mandated, and try to understand the context, why God gave that instruction, and then what was it used for, and they give the full comprehensive study of it and analysis. And at the end of the day, they say, okay, if we transfer that now into our today's context, here is what God would guide us into accepting as congruent or equates with what has been the purposes used in Bible times. And so decisions are made in that way, but it's a wide cross-section of individuals and scholars and prayerful prayer warriors and everybody coming together and giving study to the Bible itself, what was God's mandate and what was God's intent in his purposes for it, and we arrive at what we can use it for today in our today's context in the 21st century.
Thank you very much. Very comprehensive.
And those are not easily changed from time to time.
Yeah. The matter that decisions are not made by individuals, but by committees, I think is just a testimony to the organization, the strength of the structure of the church, the organizational structure. From time to time, people would look at me and say, oh, you did that and you did that. And I'd have to explain, the church is not run by a man, and no one person makes decisions. Decisions are always made by committees. And that these policies are formulated at the largest level of the organization. And one of these days, we're going to talk about organizational structure here on Let's Talk, because there are lots of people who do not quite understand that. But let's go to another question. This person is asking, what is the storehouse? Bringing all the tithe into the storehouse. What is the storehouse? What does it mean when it says that there may be meat in my house? Interesting question.
Very interesting question.
Yes.
I like it. Now the church, where the administration of the work takes place, that is because we know what the tithe is to be used for. Then we establish that the church, so at one time when the church in its embryonic stage had just one headquarter and just serving a few communities or churches, then that was the only place that could have received the tithe. But as the church grew and became so much more complex, then we have the delegation. It remains the same, because you see the Inter-American Division, for instance, is an extension, or it's the General Conference, in the extension of the General Conference. The Union is an extension of the Inter-American Division. The Conference and Mission, that's also an extension that manages the work of proclamation of the gospel. And so that is the authorized body that's given to us, inspired by God, to receive a conference, a local conference, or even a union office, a conference, a mission office, IED office. You can go to that office and pay a tithe, no problem. GC, you can go directly to GC and pay tithe, no problem. So that is from where the work is being managed or administered. And so that is the storehouse of God, we believe.
So what I hear you saying is that the storehouse is the administrative quarters.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Interesting. Let's take another question. Time is going quickly. We only have about 8 more minutes. Can you
You
believe it?
serious? What?
Yes. When you inherit non-tithe property, is it tithable? Now, I'm not sure I understand this question. Maybe Dr. Peters would be able to help us out. When you inherit non-tithe property, is it tithable? I'm not sure what the person is asking here.
Well,
Go ahead, Dr. Peters. I was going to say.
I assume the person is asking, do you pay when who inherit, an individual or the church?
So I would like to ask this individual if they could qualify what they mean, if they could be a little more specific, and you could send that, we would respond to it. If we don't come back to it today, be listening next week, because we're going to be back next week. Another question here is, should non-tithe payers, interesting, Dr. Peters, I want to hear your take on this one. Should non-tithe payers be allowed to hold office in the church?
Well, I have to say I was born and bred a Seventh-day Adventist, and all my years there have always been, well, actually when I was growing up it was no, just straight out no. If you didn't pay tithes, you could not be and hold office in the church. And as we were influenced, I will say, by outside, you will hear debates on it. Some people think, yes, you should pay, you should hold office. Now, if you're not working and you don't have any income, and I shouldn't say work, nothing to pay your tithes on, well, you can hold office. But if you are working, or if you are receiving some form of income and you are violating one of God's mandate, because this is a mandate from God. It's not from the first elder or the pastor or Pastor Henry, the treasurer of the union. This is a mandate from God. So if you're not faithful to God in terms of returning a tithe to him, I'm not certain how you will execute the office that you are given in church, how faithful you will be, and your influence on others in terms of bringing them to Christ.
Well, we just said that if you're not returning tithe, you're robbing God.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
If you're willing to confront God in that way, then why would we put you to serve? If you know that the cashier in your business establishment is stealing your money, why make them serve? So it's interesting. Of course, the church manual makes it clear, in terms of policy guidelines. But for me, the rationale is, if you're stealing from God, how can we trust you to serve effectively in His cause?
In addition to that, Dr. Greene, you're one, yes, it disqualifies you because it speaks to a fractured relationship between you and God. Also, the tithe, we said, is holy. And if you can not treat something that is holy in the proper way, then how can we then place in your under your jurisdiction or under your authority other things? Because anything can be misused by you. So it is something that we can't even debate.
Exactly.
But yes, if somebody's not paying tithe, that disqualifies them.
Okay, the person who asked the original question about the non-tithe property, they clarified it. Now, I'm looking at these questions and I wish we had all afternoon to respond to them. Next week is going to be interesting. But we did ask that question before, so let's go back to it. The person who asked the question about when you inherit non-tithe property, they're saying if the increase is non-cash, say a house, and you don't have the cash equivalent to return tithe. So they're saying, suppose somebody gives you a house. What do you do in a situation like that? I think that's what they're they're getting at here. You can't return a portion of the house. So what do you do?
To me, you have to get some value on the property, because we would have read in, can't remember the exact text at this point in time, where the Lord is in Leviticus. They were instructed to return a tithe. Yes, it's in Leviticus. Return a tithe on the first fruit, whether it was products that they grew, whether it was animals, whatever they had. And I assume there was some value in instances where they couldn't take this, because you couldn't carry all these things, I imagine, into the storehouse. They had to put some value at some point in time on it. So I will apply that. I will think we will apply the same now, where you don't have, it's not cash in your hand, but attribute some value to it. However the value has to be determined, and you could pay tithes on it because it is an increase.
Except that, back in that time, the sheep and the goat and so on, that's what they bartered with.
Mm-hmm.
They used that was the cash they had. In some places across the world, that is still happening. If somebody gives you a house, though, I see it differently. If somebody gives you a house, then what is practical is that I would see that person giving a thank offering to God. I see just a thank offering. Just imagine a poor guy was just given favor by some rich individual. Maybe an old friend met him who is well endowed. This poor guy, well, that's a poor guy, just ordinary guy, renting a house and so on. And he meets this guy and he said, look, man, I know you years back then, but now I'm seeing you today here. I have a house here. I'm giving it to you. This person now has just climbed the ladder, the economic ladder, by now getting a house in his name. He owns the house. I don't think God gonna expect this guy to say, this house is worth $1 million, so give $100,000. You see, God is a relationship with God there, and you got to recognize God as the source of this. So I am seeing God expecting you to just acknowledge him as the giver through this person. So I'm seeing in that case a thank offering. It's a different case if somebody, and if maybe there's another question itself, if they sell the house, if they sell the house, then that's a different matter altogether.
Well, we're kind of out of time here, so we're gonna have to wrap up and come back next week. But I've heard some meaningful suggestions with respect to this. Likewise, if you're not in a position to return tithe because you don't have it, there's some persons who understand that, listen, this is God's property, it's not mine. I didn't work for it, so I'm going to use it for the benefit of God. I'm going to devote this property to see how I can use it to advance the cause of God. And perhaps when that person writes a will, they can determine that a certain percentage of this is to go towards the person. So we can tithe in different ways, in
Exactly,
instances
yes.
like those.
I agree with that.
I was about to say, because
Sorry.
when I say put a value, because certainly, as you said, if I don't have, I can't pay it. No. But if I have a value and I keep this in my mind, whatever the value is, or the other methods just mentioned, but the fact is to me that it's an increase to you, and you should, well, that's to me, keep that in mind, that you have to, you should give something to the Lord where that is concerned.
Yeah, and Dr. Greene, both you and Dr. Peters mentioned two important things. One is, but I still convinced that I would give God a thank offering to begin with, recognizing that it came from him. And the point you mentioned just now is very good, that in my will, because at that time, maybe the house has a greater value. In my will, I'm saying so much % of this should go towards the work of God, if not all of it.
Definitely. Our time has expired. I was going to say on the thank offering, you know, it's not just tithe, it's offering. So,
Yes.
so an offering is supposed to be an offering of gratitude, most definitely. But guess what? We have to stop now. We're going to be back here next week. And may I suggest prepare you for what is to come, because to come, we're going to be talking about, beyond next week, that is, we're going to be talking about issues relating to mental health, to demon possession. How do we distinguish between the two? You know, the mental health of the gospel worker and these kinds of things. We have some exciting topics lined up for you, but for now, we're dealing with tithing. We still have, I'm going to tell you, we have a number of questions here that we have not gotten to as yet, but we will attempt next week to address these as we look at how the church uses the tithe likewise. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you, Dr. Peters. Thank you, Pastor Henry, for sharing your time. We look forward to another encounter next week. May God bless you all. Until next week, same time. May his peace and his grace rest upon you.